Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 172, The Australian Adventuress, Part 2. The second part of this episode continues with Florence Forrest's misdemeanours and information on her family. On the 29th of August 1920 in the Perth Sunday Times, under the heading of Missing Friends, William Cuthbert Gillespie, formerly of Mudgee, New South Wales, or anyone knowing his whereabouts, kindly communicate with his brother Gideon Gillespie JP of the Evening News Office in Sydney. So a month later, 29th of September 1920, again the books are being advertised. A new book just out, The Life and Adventures of Barbara Turner Taylor. All sporting people fond of reading should obtain a copy of the book. The woman mentioned is well known to hundreds of Sydney racegoers, as there is hardly a course in any of the states she's not visited. She, like thousands of others, lost her money, and finding herself without the necessary to enable her to keep on going to the races, finds a way of getting rich quick and obtains thousands of pounds from some of Sydney's well-known solicitors on an imaginary fortune. Available from Royal Arcade, Pitt Street, Sydney. It says, do not miss getting a copy of this book. It gives full details of how she introduced herself to these men and caricatures of all concerned. A year later, on the 26th of October 1921, Alice Turner, alias Barbara Turner, alias Tierney, alias Taylor, alias Florence Gillespie, alias Adina Florence Gillespie, alias Barbara Tiernan, alias Bradley, charged on warrant with stealing the sum of £106, the property of Harry Placings, has been arrested and committed for trial at the Quarter Sessions. A month later, cleverest woman swindler, forged cheque for £3,500, sentenced to 12 months. In Sydney on Friday, Barbara Turner, 43, was charged at the Darlinghurst Sessions with having forged a cheque for £3,500 and on her representations that she owned a property in Western Australia, defrauded Harry Placing of Bathurst Street City of £106. The Crown stated the accused was the cleverest female swindler in the state. In passing a sentence of 12 months, Judge Browning warned the accused, who'd had prior convictions in 2 states, that on her reappearance in court she would be declared an indeterminate criminal. And then on the 27th of November 1921, with an article titled Writes Her Own Life Story, Barbara Turner, aged 43, is the author of a book which discloses many of the exploits which were responsible for her various sojourns in jail. The title of it is The Life and Adventures of Barbara Turner Taylor, and the author no doubt prides herself on the fact that a copy is preserved at the Mitchell Library. Such is fame. Barbara began life as a pupil teacher in a country school, but teaching was not in her line. She wanted to be an actress. After the death of her father, she secured a position of governess. After a few weeks' courtship, she was married in Sydney, and it turned out anything but a happy marriage, hence the start of downhill of life. She went through thousands of pounds and declared that horse racing was her ruin. On the 31st of December 1921, in the Murwillumbah Tweed Daily, arch female criminal. Writes story of her life. Sydney detectives' discovery. Says, what can be said of a woman criminal who not only writes a book but has it published as well, with ink sketches of her victims displayed upon its gaudy cover and interspersed in 200 or more pages? Those who could accomplish such a thing could be counted upon the fingers of one hand. 2 months ago, Detectives Barclay and Sedgwick of Police Headquarters arrested a woman who was nearly 50 years of age for having forged and uttered a cheque for £3,500, the name being that of a businessman of Western Australia. She was committed for trial at Darlinghurst on the 25th of November and sentenced to 12 months hard labour. That woman was Barbara Turner Taylor, an old-time Sydney schoolmaster's only daughter, and it was amongst her decidedly miscellaneous property that the police found the book which she wrote some years ago. It was entitled The Life and Adventures of Barbara Taylor. It was neatly bound in cinnamon paper and bore the stamp of a Sydney printing firm. Whether the publication was a bestseller or not, the officers didn't learn, but they chuckled delightedly in consequence of the fact that they had been instrumental in adding to the archives of criminology, an exhibit that is most interesting and which will prove of very considerable historical value. The initial portion of the publication is more or less of a very cheap example of literary ability, and it is devoted principally to the early life of the woman. By and by, though, when she gives the stories of her exploits and her efforts to get rid of the pack of hungry wolves that seem to be forever doomed to growl upon her threshold, she grows more flowery and more interesting too. It is evident that in the book, the Taylor's life of crime was not attributed to heredity. It seems that her crime, nerve and inclination was acquired and cultivated with assiduity after her first successful interferences with the law. She explains that her parents came from England and that her mother's people were numbered amongst the wealthy of Birmingham. Her father was a schoolmaster. She was born in Sydney a little time after the parents arrived here, and at an early age was sent to a country convent boarding school. She studied hard there, not only the ordinary school matter but music as well. Then she lived with her parents, and when she was just about in her teens, her father died, leaving her and her mother to battle for themselves. They took a boarding house in the country, and one of the first of their guests fell in love with Barbara and married her. A baby girl was born, but when it was no more than a few months old, husband and wife tired of each other and they separated. Barbara had a little money and she did a fair amount of music teaching. Then the child sickened and died, and she was left lonely and miserable. She drifted to Singleton when her funds were exhausted and petitioned a friend to help her. He did so, but during the interview he momentarily left his office and Barbara lifted a few blank cheques from his book, lying right in front of her on the table. What she did with them led to the police growing interested in her, and she was a little later sentenced to 6 months hard labour in Darlinghurst. She resolved to go straight when released, and in order to make a fresh start, she wrote a long in memoriam poem to a child. When she came out, she sold the poem in leaflet form and made enough money to keep her body and soul together. She moved from one place to another. All the while, the odds against her were heavy and sometimes overwhelming. She figured that to secure money by false pretences, paved by ingratiating herself with her victims, was the easiest, though riskiest method. She thereupon decided on a plan of action and singled out a solicitor at North Sydney for the first attempt. She went to him and asked for work. She explained she'd come from Western Australia where she had property. This property was up for sale and in the hands of the solicitors. Whether because of the jewellery and the fact that the clothes were expensive and good-looking is not known, but he gave her some work there and then and asked her to call again. In the meantime, she enlisted the services of a printer and with him placed an order for a few letterheads. He did them for her in the hope that she would succeed in securing a large order for him. She faked the letters, which bore the name and particulars of the West Australian solicitors, and when she showed them to the gentleman at North Sydney, he could see nothing wrong with her prospects of shortly becoming rich and promised to advance anything she wanted. He did so, to the tune of nearly £300. 2 other solicitors and a piano agent were treated in much the same way, and altogether, although the book she doesn't mention the exact figures, she secured over £2,000. With some of the money she bought a new home, and a portion was gambled at the suburban race meetings and at Randwick. I was getting into it deeper and deeper, she goes on. I knew it was all wrong. I was content, after several smashes, to go to the races once in a while, and although I was still well supplied and occasionally drew more rolls from those men, I did not derive much happiness. Occasionally I had to drown my sorrows in a little brandy. Of course, for all these little flutters, Barbara had to pay the penalty exacted by the law in each one, after the victims came to their senses and notified the police. She received severe sentences for all of them, and the piano agent, from whom she'd obtained £325, under the pretence that she had lots of money coming to her, made her bankrupt. Barbara continues, I would have been stupid not to have taken the money, although I deserved what punishment I got. But solicitors, one would think, ought to be expected to use a little discretion in dealing out to women who are strangers large sums of money, and it was all very nice while it lasted, and I had a good time. The preface of the book was obviously not written by the thief, for it was commendatory and glowing, whereas the actual adventures and dealings with the police are written in a modest style. The preface says that Turner was not extremely handsome, but good-hearted and possessed a very strong personality. And all through the remarkable publication, this Australian adventuress stressed her foolishness in breaking the law. She continually stressed the fact that she had no real happiness, and that had she not gambled, she would have been able to repay a good deal of the cash. It is now beyond the understanding of the police how the existence of the book did not come under their notice long before. They've made inquiries in the city since the woman's trial and have been unable to find another copy of the book. It must have been sold out or thrown out. And now, in spite of all of her dearly bought experience and lessons, Barbara, nearing the declining years of her checkered career, is living in jail for having attempted a trick far beyond her imaginations when she was in her prime. On the 31st of July 1925, in the District Court of Sydney, it's a case between William Herman Lober, plaintiff, and Florence Evelyn Tiernan, known as Florence Evelyn Turner, wife of James William Turner, defendant. On Saturday the 12th of September 1925 at 11 o'clock a.m, unless the writ issued herein is previously satisfied, the registrar will sell by public auction the right, the title and the interest of the above-named defendant, subject to the limitation contained, a piece or parcel of land situated in the municipality of Petersham, and that is presented by J. Bonthorne, Register of the Court. So basically they're getting their home taken away from them. 3 years later, on the 18th of October 1928, in the Sydney Morning Herald, in probate, a suit to revoke probate, Tiernan versus Forrest. This was a suit instituted by Florence Evelyn Tiernan against her brothers Leslie Clarence Forrest and William James Forrest, in which the plaintiff asked that the probate of the will of their mother, Sarah Forrest, dated on the 3rd of July 1922, be revoked, and that probate of a will dated August the 9th, 1923, in which she was appointed sole executrix and sole beneficiary, be granted to her. The plaintiff claimed that on the 6th of August 1924, probate was granted to the defendants of a document purported to have been executed by her mother as their last will and testament on the 8th of July 1922, in which the defendants were appointed executors and trustees. She alleged that in August 1923, her mother, being of sound mind, memory and understanding, duly executed a document as her last will and testament, which revoked all former wills and testaments. She'd been informed that the will of August 1923 had been destroyed under her mother's directions, notwithstanding which she asks that probate of that will be granted to her and that the earlier probate should be revoked. Her mother died on the 23rd of May 1924. The defendants pleaded that the will referred to have been executed in August 1923 was duly revoked by the testatrix, who ordered her solicitors to destroy it. His Honour revoked the probate granted in the will of 8th of July 1922 and declared that the deceased died intestate. He referred the matter of the grant of letters of administration in respect to her estate to the Registrar of Probates. And on the 4th of September 1929, Florence Evelyn Tiernan, alias Barbara Tiernan, alias Florence Gillespie, alias Barbara Turner Taylor, alias Bradley, 40 years old, charged on warrant with obtaining the sum of £100, the property of Bessie Champion, by false pretence, and has been arrested. Further charged with obtaining the sum of £23 and 10 shillings, the property of Mary Bibley, by similar means, committed for trial at the Quarter Sessions, identical with the prisoner tried, Barbara Turner, alias Jessie Turner, from the Police Gazette of 1921. And a year later, on the 28th of February 1930, in the Sydney Labour Daily, guilty and not guilty, prisoner at Sessions. Before Judge Armstrong at the Quarter Sessions yesterday, Florence Evelyn Tiernan, 40, married woman, was acquitted of having falsely pretended to Bessie Alec Champion that she had been left an estate, a house at Dulwich Hill, and that the £12,000 was in the probate court waiting distribution to her and her two brothers in equal shares, by means of which pretence she obtained £100 with intent to defraud. The jury added to their verdict that the event of Mrs. Tiernan receiving any money from the estate, the money advanced to her, be a first charge thereon. There was a further indictment involving £23 and 10 shillings alleged to have been obtained from Mary Dibley. On this, she was remanded on bail of £20. And another article on the 14th of June 1930, fraud charge against woman fails. Florence Evelyn Tiernan, middle-aged woman, pleaded not guilty before Judge White at the Quarter Sessions yesterday of a charge of having in November 1928 at Redfern falsely pretended to Mary Dibley that her mother had left an estate of £13,000 in cash and a house valued at £1,400, and that £12,000 was awaiting distribution to her and her two brothers in equal shares. She is alleged to obtain £23 and 10 shillings by representation, which the Crown claimed was false. But the jury brought in a verdict of not guilty. She was acquitted and discharged. However, 2 days later, charged with obtaining money by fraud. Florence Evelyn Tiernan, 53, domestic, was remanded at the Central Police Court yesterday on a charge of having attempted to obtain £7 by false pretences. It was alleged that she represented to Ruby Mary Laura Payton that she'd received a letter signed W.J. Forrest stating she was to receive £2,658 on Saturday or Sunday next. Payton said that she paid £82.10 to the defendant in the belief that she would be repaid. The letter had told her she was in a desperate plight, having been ejected from her home by her husband because of some trouble with her daughter. William James Forrest, schoolteacher and brother of the defendant, said he had not corresponded with his sister for 26 years. She was not to receive the amount alleged under his mother's will. So far as he knew, she had disposed of her share. The prosecution alleged the letter was not genuine. Bail was allowed at £30. On the 25th of October 1930, woman imprisoned in Sydney. When sentenced at the Darlinghurst Sessions today to 18 months imprisonment on a charge of forging and uttering, Florence Tiernan, an elderly woman, shouted to the arresting constable that she hoped that he would be dead before she served the time. Judge White was told that the accused had a long record of convictions against her dating back to 1899. This referred to the case on which she defrauded Mrs. Payton when she said that she was waiting on proceeds from her mother's will that she was receiving from her brother. Detective Sergeant Smith stated that when he asked the accused what she'd done with all the money, she replied she'd spent it in hotels, having a jolly good time, shouting for Tom, Dick and Harry. The accused said that she'd received from Mrs. Payton £24 on loan and there was no intention to defraud. Police evidence was that Tiernan was one of the most shrewdest and most callous false pretences women in Sydney and would stop at nothing to serve her ends. And the 18 months she received was with light labour. In the Police Gazette, it stated on the 26th of November 1930 that she actually received 18 months light labour on each count, and it was concurrent. She was released by 1936 as she featured in the census with her husband James, and they were living at Piermont, and James was working as a wharf labourer. 2 years later, it announces James Richmond Tiernan's death on the 20th of April 1938 at his residence in Piermont. And it states he was the dearly loved husband of Florence Tiernan and loving father of Barbara and Noel. And more detail on his death. The jury returned a verdict for the defendant company in action brought by Florence Tiernan of Bund Street, Piermont, against the Adelaide Steamship Company Limited under the Compensation to Relatives Act to recover losses suffered by herself, a daughter and a grandson through the death of her husband James Tiernan. It was alleged that his death resulted from injuries he received in October 1937 when he was working on a winch on the steamer Bungaree, and that there was negligence in the management of the ship and the unloading of the logs. Florence died on the 3rd of June 1951 at Ryde in New South Wales, aged 74, and her death notice states Florence Evelyn Tiernan died at hospital, wife of the late James Tiernan, late of Piermont, and loving mother of Barbara. And a little bit about her family. Her daughter, Barbara Tiernan, was born on the 16th of September 1909 in Newcastle. She had a child, Stanley Harry Sharp, on the 20th of March 1927 in Paddington, New South Wales. She was 17 and Stanley was 43. He was a married man. Their son's name was Ralph Tiernan, but he was known as Noel. On the 18th of September 1926, so just before she had a child with Stanley Sharp, Barbara was in an advertisement and she was noted as the beautiful Rexona girl of Gloucester Street, Sydney. And she writes, "I have used Rexona soap for years and I think it is delightful for the skin." However, only a month later, she's not in an advertisement, but she was in the Central Court, and it says, "Girl proceeds against employer in Sydney." Stanley Harry Sharp, 42, was charged at the Central Court today with having committed a serious assault on Barbara Tiernan, aged 17, in August 1925 at the City Fruit Markets. The girl said at the time she was in the employ of the defendant, who, she alleged, assaulted her on 2 occasions. Cross-examined for the defence, she admitted she told Constable Nuss that what had occurred was with her consent. In discharging Sharp, the magistrate said, however reprehensible the conduct of the defendant might be considered, there was no case of a serious nature alleged. And another article in more detail, Sweet 17 in the office, pretty girl bluntly accuses Sydney Sharp. The charge was serious, but it failed. Miss Tiernan told Constable Nuss of No. 4 station that on each occasion when her employer had subjected her to interference, she was a consenting party, and she admitted in evidence that she'd made that statement, and consequently the case against Sharp, as far as the major charge was concerned, was shattered. The girl, although only of tender years, is in trouble. Sharp was carrying on business at the city fruit markets up until July of the current year. It was in August 1925 that he engaged Barbara Tiernan as a stenographist. The girl, who is well built and attractive, was palpably nervous giving evidence, and it was necessary for Prosecutor Napper, Sharp and his solicitor, Mr. A.J. Morgan, to go right to the witness box in order to hear certain parts of her evidence. She stated that as early as the second week in August 1925, Sharp attempted interference, but she repulsed his advances and told him that she would complain to her mother and father about his conduct. Sharp said he would not do it again. Having regard to his promise, she refrained from telling her people anything about the matter. Things went on placidly, and according to the girl, she had nothing to complain of until towards the end of May this year. One Monday she told Sharp that she would be leaving his employ as she secured another position. He made no reply. The following Wednesday, said the girl, she had occasion to go into a little room that was partitioned off the main office. She was getting some books when Sharp came in and said that he wanted to speak to her. There was a bench in the room, said the girl in a very low voice, and Sharp asked her to sit down. She remained standing, and then he caught hold of her. She struggled and again threatened to report him to her mother and father, but he would not release her, she said, and after a struggle succeeded in pulling her down on the bench. Sharp, the girl went on, made a remark about the moral laxity of all the girls nowadays, and after a struggle he succeeded. I tried to scream, said the girl slowly, but he put his hand over my mouth. I was helpless. He was kissing me and pulling me about. Eventually he released me and walked out. I got dressed and later went home. Miss Tiernan said that she told Sharp afterwards she intended to tell her people about him and he did not reply. She went home that night but did not say anything to her people. The following Friday at 4:30 p.m, said the girl, she again went into the little office. Sharp was seated outside when she went in, but shortly afterwards he followed her. He caught hold of her again and despite her struggles once again overcame her. The girl denied that she had been a consenting party to what took place on either occasion. She claimed that she resisted Sharp all the time, but that he succeeded in getting the better of her. She told him for the fourth time that she would tell her people about him, and he replied that if she did, he would shoot her. He also said, continued the girl, that I am not married to Mrs. Sharp, and if anything happens, I will marry you. Miss Tiernan said that she was too frightened of Sharp to tell her people. She left Sharp's employ on the Saturday and on the Monday went to work for Mr. G.W. Burton at Station House. She was there for about a week when Sharp called in to see her one day and said that he would like to see Mrs. Tiernan. The girl told him she would tell her mother to call on him. After a conversation between my mother and Sharp, it was arranged that I should return to his employ. I did so and remained there up until the end of June this year. He came to me one day and said he was going out of business and gave me notice. The girl then told how proceedings came to be instituted against the fruiterer. She stated that one night she was sleeping with her mother and the latter asked her certain questions. Subsequently, her mother took her to the doctor and later on, the girl went to the police. Miss Tiernan strenuously denied that any man had interfered with her before or since Mr. Sharp. Mr. Morgan asked, "Did you tell Constable Nuss at No. 4 station that what took place on each occasion took place with your consent?" Miss Tiernan said yes. Sergeant Napper said, "Who was with you on that occasion?" The girl said, "My father." Mrs. Florence Evelyn Tiernan gave evidence that her daughter was 17 in September last, and Mrs. Tiernan said that she swore out the information against Sharp. In answer to the magistrate, Mrs. Tiernan said the reason why she did not lay an information earlier against Sharp was because she was unaware of what had taken place. Constable Mackey, who arrested Sharp on a warrant, stated that when he read the complaint to the fruiterer at his home in Petersham, Sharp denied the correctness of the allegation against him. At the Central Police Station, when he was charged, Sharp replied, "Oh, that's ridiculous." Dr. Audrey Palmer, Government Medical Officer at Sydney, stated he examined the girl on the 12th of October in the hospital admission depot and found certain evidence she was to become a mother. This concluded the evidence, and Magistrate Jennings did not call upon Sharp to answer the charge against him. However reprehensible the conduct of this man might be, he said, there's no evidence to support the charge against him, and he is discharged. Sharp left the court with alacrity and was joyfully greeted by his wife and several friends. They were all excited and pleased at the magisterial finding. Sharp was anxious to get away from the precincts of the court and chatted gaily, and departed at once with his friends and relatives. The girl and her mother, with Constable Mackey, then came out. Big tears stood in the pretty eyes of the unfortunate stenographer. Her lot is a very unhappy one, and she will have to face the greatest ordeal of her life without much comforting knowledge. DNA does support that Noel is Stanley's son. Barbara lived in Piermont, Sydney with her parents, and she worked as a typist and a clerk. On the 4th of October 1946, it announces in the Department of Attorney General and Justice that Barbara Tiernan is to be a wardress at the Prisons Department. Barbara married Andrew Ross on the 16th of October 1952 when she was 43 and Andrew was 40, and Barbara died on the 28th of September 1982 at Henley Beach South in South Australia, aged 73. Her son Noel married Elizabeth Mary Eileen Kaleo, known as Betty, on the 17th of April 1952 at Coogee, New South Wales, when he was 25 and Elizabeth 23. They had 2 children. Noel was a police officer in Adelaide in 1953, and he died on the 22nd of January 2015 in Ballarat, Victoria, aged 87. So the interesting story of Florence Evelyn Forrest, otherwise commonly known as Barbara Turner Taylor, and her other aliases.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.